So today we're going to be talking about X-Men Origins Wolverine. X-Men Origins Wolverine is directed by Gavin Hood, written by David Benioff and Skip Woods, and stars Hugh Jackman, Liev Schreiber, Danny Huston, and Lynn Collins. Now, in X-Men Origins Wolverine, we get to see Logan, or as his real name is James Howlett, from when he was a kid living in the 19th century, and how his mutant powers were awakened, and him kind of living throughout the years with his brother Sabretooth. But then the two encounter William Stryker, of course, who is already at this point experimenting with mutants, and after Logan gets adamantium grafted onto his bones, he becomes like kind of like a fugitive, and people are out to hunt him. Now, X-Men Origins Wolverine was, I believe, supposed to be the beginning of a series of movies that were going to tell origin stories for the X-Men, and that obviously didn't work out well because this movie had lots of troubled production going in. Like there were lots of weird things going on, like the script not being ready while principal photography was happening, Fox having arguments with Gavin Hood, the director. Not all those problems really show because this movie is just a mess. When you watch it, it just feels like a bunch of scenes like kind of put together. Honestly, you can kind of tell from the tone of voice I'm using that number one, I'm kind of sleepy, and number two, like talking about this movie just doesn't really make me excited. I mean, there's some bad movies that I like talking about, but X-Men Origins Wolverine, I wouldn't say is necessarily a bad movie. It's just so vapid. It's just so empty. First of all, this movie was made in 2009, and if you look at the visual effects from X-Men The Last Stand 2006 and the visual effects here, the visual effects in The Last Stand are so much better. There's something about using too much visual effects that really just dulls the effect. Having a lot of visual effects can lead to oversaturation. That's what this movie is, oversaturated with effects. There's a certain point, like in the halfway mark, I think, of this movie, where you realize that you have been dulled by the amount of visual effects in this movie, and it just does not impress you anymore. There's nothing really new or innovative happening. It's just they're just throwing things on screen, like things are moving quickly, explosions are happening. What's frustrating about the visual effects here is that they do use some practical effects in this movie, and they look so good. I mean, really, like just look at Wolverine's bone claws, like near the beginning of the movie. They actually look really, really nice. When he gets the metal adamantium claws, they look super fake. As in, there's like a scene where he's kind of doing that with his claws because he's like experimenting with them, and they just look completely fake. More practical effects that were in this movie were like the Blob, who the big fat suit he's wearing or whatever. It actually looks real. Ryan Reynolds is in this movie for like a tiny portion of it, and it looks like he's doing, if not like his own stunts, at least there's actual wire work being done, and it looks cool. But no, they had to throw that all away in favor of CGI. X-Men Origins Wolverine is also one of those movies that just feels at the same time too long and like nothing's happened like in that entire running time. They really do skip through the best parts in this movie. Like there's certain portions where as a viewer you start thinking like, oh, okay, they can come up with really good, character moments here, and then they don't. Like they just use that supposedly like potentially poignant moment as a springboard to another dull action scene. And like I mentioned a while ago, it really does feel like just a random bunch of scenes thrown together. Like it's really like the way they storyboarded this was, okay, let's have cool scene number one, cool scene number two, cool scene number three. Don't know how they connect, but we'll figure out a way to script them together. And it doesn't work because there's plot holes everywhere. Here's my biggest suggestion for like if I could go back in time and fix this movie, and not like Days of Future Past, but really try and fix this movie when it was in production. I would have really focused on his actual origin, him actually getting the claws and him developing a relationship with his brother Sabretooth. Because you realize that most of this movie is not an origin story. It's just another adventure with Wolverine already with the metal claws. Like he gets the metal claws so early in this movie that I really thought that was going to be the end game. Like I thought that's how it would end. That's how he lost his memory, and you can tell that after the filmmakers here just storyboarded all their cool scenes together, they tried to find a way to kind of make it connect to the first three movies. Like they were looking for an excuse to make him lose his memory, and it just does not work. Like it would have been better if they stuck with what everyone else was expecting, and went with him losing his memory because he got the adamantium. Also, why are all these characters here? Like, what is the point of having all these random mutants here. Like, why is Deadpool here? He serves absolutely no purpose, and he's not even like the Deadpool from the comics. And I never really make that argument. Like, it wasn't like that in the comics, but here really is just completely wasted. One big thing that I don't understand why is why they had to feel the need to put in characters there from the first three X-Men movies. Like, I won't spoil it, but there are a couple of characters there who we already knew from the first three X-Men movies, and it just feels so strange that they're here in this movie that doesn't even feel related to the first three movies. Also, the dialogue sucks. Like, there's no other way around it. Like, the dialogue is terrible. It really just feels like it's that kind of writing that feels like they're cool and they're using cool one-liners and stuff. But what happens is that this is such a disservice to the character of Wolverine, because Logan is such a complicated character. There's so much going on with him, but in this movie, with all the dialogue they wrote, they just focused on him being like this snarky, badass mean guy, and just that's not the Wolverine we have come to know after three movies. In terms of direction, now I have seen another one of Gavin Hood's movies, which was Ender's Game, which I thought was okay, and I was actually pleasantly surprised that it was okay. And I think he directed one other good movie back then, so I'm not really sure whose fault it is. Is it Gavin Hood's fault or is it Fox's fault? But whatever happened, the direction in this movie is like Brett Ratner's directing in The Last Stand times like 1,000. There's literally no scene here that relies on just the actors and the writing and direction and stuff. Like, everything is just so piled on with extra, CGI and cool stuff. Like I said, it's just so empty, like there's no real moment where you feel like a character has just developed. This movie really did feel like what happens when people who don't know X-Men come together and decide, hey, I think this is what makes a cool X-Men movie, let's put it together. And in terms of acting, mostly, I kind of blame this on direction mostly, but for the most part, also the acting just isn't that impressive. Lynn Collins as Wolverine's love interest here, Kayla, just she I didn't buy it. Danny Houston as a striker, I thought could have been great. Just that if you're playing a character that had already been established before as him being a certain way, he didn't follow up on that at all. So he just felt like a completely different character who was really bland. Will I Am is in this movie. Not sure why. The people I will say have real potential, although they did not have screen time at all, were number one Kevin Durant, who plays Blob. I thought he was cool. Dominic Monaghan, of course, like I love Dominic Monaghan, but he barely has a role here. Ryan Reynolds, I actually really like Ryan Reynolds because I think his charisma always shows no matter what character he's playing. He has some pretty funny lines at certain points, but then he disappears after like 30 minutes. And Taylor Kitsch as Gambit, like we finally get Gambit in a movie, and they do not use him at all. Like I thought Taylor Kitsch did a fine job. It's just he's not there. And this is where I segue into the things that I think kind of saved this movie from being absolute, like, flaming garbage, in my opinion at least. For one, if you have Hugh Jackman in a movie, I can't call it garbage because Hugh Jackman's always great. Like, even with a script this bad, he really does the best with what he can. You believe all the emotions this guy is going through. I'm also really, really happy they, made Sabretooth like a character because if you remember him from the first X-Men movie, he wasn't a character. He was just like I don't know what he was. He was just this random thug. And here, I actually like how they gave him a personality. They, gave these two brothers this dynamic to work with. I like Liev Schreiber's performance as this guy. And while they don't necessarily delve into that character, definitely not as much as anyone would have wanted them to, it's still cool to see them have a relationship. I don't know, like I just found it cool. I mean, I guess because my standards were so low from everything else that happened in the movie, I just appreciated Wolverine having a villain to fight who, had an actual connection to him. And like I said a while ago, I think the first like 5 to 10 to 15 minutes of this movie where it really just kind of shows Wolverine and Victor Creed like going throughout history, fighting wars and stuff. That first 15 minutes or so is fantastic. Like when I was watching it, I was thinking, okay, this is getting really interesting. Like this could be a great movie. It's not. So in the end, I don't hate X-Men Origins Wolverine because I'm not attached to the comics, but as a viewer of movies, like when I watch it, it's just like a big ball of eh. I can totally understand the hate though. Like I mean, for X-Men: The Last Stand, like I'm kind of more defensive of it, but here, like hate on it if you want. Like I can get it because it's messy. So that is my review of X-Men Origins Wolverine. When you guys think of it, whether you loved it or hated it, Whether you agree with me or not, please leave me a comment. Let's have a conversation.